Nancy Brophy is a romantic suspense novelist who penned the essay, How to Murder Your Husband. Her husband, Dan, was found gunned down in the kitchen where he worked. Is this a case of life imitating art or a fantasy gone too far? This real-life murder mystery has baffled law enforcement and the medical community, leaving many unanswered questions. Until now. Today, in an exclusive interview with the source closest to the case, we investigate the possible clues she may have left behind in the pages of her books.
The thing I know about murder is that every one of us have it in him or her when pushed far enough.
Those were the words of romantic suspense writer Nancy Brophy, whose husband, Chef Daniel Brophy, was shot dead at the Oregon Culinary Institute last June. Back in 2011, Brophy wrote an essay titled How to Murder Your Husband. On September 5th, she was arrested for just that. She pleaded not guilty and was held without bail. Authorities remained tight-lipped about the details. Brophy once wrote, "Each type of murder leaves clues." But are there clues in any of the sultry romance novels she penned? Novels like The Wrong Cop, The Wrong Brother, or The Wrong Husband, about a woman trying to escape an abusive marriage. Brophy confessed that she spends lots of time thinking about murder, but thoughts, no matter how repugnant, are not a crime. Today, shocking details and missed hidden clues as we unblur the line between Nancy Brophy's fantasies and the reality of what really happened to her murdered husband. Crime correspondent Melissa Moore and forensic psychologist Dr. Brian Russell are here to analyze the forensics and the psychology behind this crime. So, Melissa, a lot of the evidence remains sealed, but something catalyzed the police department's decision to arrest her in the murder of her husband.
Well, it took 3 months, and this is actually really unusual for a judge to determine to seal all the evidence, and we don't know what that evidence is. I reached out to the detective, I reached out to the authorities, and this is an ongoing case, so they're not going to release that. However, what I find, suspicious really is that she told a neighbor she was thinking about moving. And with the ongoing investigation, if you really love your husband, why would you move? And I would think you would want to know who murdered your husband if it wasn't you.
So, Dr. Russell, she's currently being held without bail. What does that mean, and has she spoken out at all about what happened?
The fact that she's being held without bail suggests that there's some pretty compelling evidence against her. What she said, the only thing we really have in her own words is this post that she made on social media where she announced to her friends and family that her husband had been murdered. She says, "I know some of you may have thought this warranted a phone call, but I'm doing it this way because," and that just struck me as, I've never seen that before. It's almost as if she was overthinking what would be suspicious, and in the course of overthinking and over preempting suspicion, she aroused my suspicion. And I love that. There's one thing I love about sociopaths is when they overestimate their alleged sociopaths, is when they overestimate their ability to fool me. And thankfully, that happens more often than not.
It does seem very calculating. So Nancy's, if she's convicted, she's found guilty of the death of her husband, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. So the stakes are big. Dr. Russell, just because someone can write about or fantasize about a murder mystery doesn't mean they have what it takes to commit the crime. So how do we know if she's capable of having done this?
So it would be very unusual for someone who had violent psychopathic urges to suppress those for decades just through the outlet of writing.
So Nancy's essay, How to Murder Your Husband, that was the title of the essay, How to Murder Your Husband. She wrote, I'll quote, "It is easier to wish people dead than to actually kill them." So, Dr. Russell, at what point, if she's guilty, do you think it became not enough just to write about it, and she felt that she needed to tip over into doing it?
If she's guilty, I don't suspect that she did it for the thrill of doing it. I suspect that she did it to solve a problem. She reached a point where she had a problem in her life, in her marriage, where she thought that this was the best way to solve the problem, and perhaps because she did write true crime and had some success at doing that, again, she may have overestimated her ability to do it and get away with it. Now, what was the problem? We don't know. We really don't have much information about a possible motive at this point. So all I can do is speculate. On fatal vows, our three most common problems that people are trying to solve when they murder their spouses are extramarital affairs, finances, and one that we know they didn't have in their marriage, which is custodial issues, child custody related things.
Can you imagine killing your spouse to get custody of the kids? I mean, that's a horrible thing to think about even. Anyway, up next, one of Dan's students and close friends speaks out in a daytime exclusive about what he says the victim's final days were like. He'll shock you.
What if killing didn't produce the right results? Would they do it again? Could they do it again? What if they liked it?
Today, the real-life murder mystery that shocked the nation. We're asking the question, what could have driven romance thriller novelist Nancy Brophy, author of the essay, How to Murder Your Husband, to allegedly murder her own husband? Dan Brophy was married to Nancy for 27 years. He was found fatally shot in the kitchen of the school where he worked. Joining me now in a daytime exclusive interview is Dan's former student and friend, Travis. Thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you.
I know this can be difficult, and I appreciate you coming forward. What kind of person was Dan?
Dan was a great guy. He was very humble, very caring guy. He was quirky. He loved making everybody laugh and smile, but he was also hard on people. And meaning he was hard on people is he pushed them to be the best that they can.
How did the community deal with this shooting? He was shot on campus. What was the mood when people found out?
It was very shocking. OCI, Oregon Culinary Institute, is a very small, tight-knit community. At most, probably 200 students at a given time. Yeah. It's small, and for something this tragic and this small to happen in a small community, it's just shocking. We never knew, was it someone correlated with a school? We all thought this was just a random attack that happened to such a great guy.
So how surprised were you when you learned later that the police were arresting Nancy, his wife, for his murder?
I was shocked, just like the rest of the OCI community. We're all shocked. We never would have put it, to be someone so close and someone that Chef loved and cared about so much.
You were close to Chef Dan. Did he speak of Nancy? And if so, how would he describe her?
Chef really didn't talk about Nancy that much while I was attending school. What I knew about their relationship was he always referred to her as management. And by that, we all just thought, oh, it's a joke. And still to this day, I don't think much of it. I think it was just kind of a little pet name that he had for her.
I don't know how many men called their wives management. It does seem... It seems a little bureaucratic, or...
I really haven't heard that often, but...
There's not a lot of detail available on this case. Why do you think the police zeroed in on Nancy?
Just like any other case, they always look at the victim or the victim's wife or spouse or whoever it may be. But what kind of was shocking and stood out a lot to me was 2 nights after Chef was murdered, and when we found out that it was him, I personally held a candlelight vigil at the school. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of people attended kind of all throughout the night, and one of those people was Nancy. Mm-hmm. And, it was great to see her there, but it was a little alarming that she was there hearing all of us grieve and cry and tell stories about Chef. And she stood there grieving with all of us.
She was grieving.
She was crying, but the way it was is like she was very distant from everybody. And everybody thought, okay, she's trying to grieve with this in her own personal way. She just lost her husband. Sure. And nobody really thought much of it until, the news came out saying that she was arrested in correlation with this.
How was her grieving not what you would have expected? I know this is tough to discern, but something obviously caught you is not right.
I didn't think that his family would be there, especially after 2 days of him being murdered. I thought they would be, all together dealing with it on their own instead of coming to the visual.
Melissa, if Nancy is proven guilty, you say this is not the typical case of domestic abuse.
Right, in the sense of when you think of domestic abuse or domestic violence, you think of a woman being abused and the male being the perpetrator. But it's absolutely possible for males to be the victim of domestic abuse. And the fact that he referred to her as management says there's probably a lot of control in this family. And I think that she definitely probably controlled him, probably controlled the finances, probably controlled so much that I think might lead to a possible motive in why this murder happened. You brought up that this is a murder solves a problem, and we talk about murder as ultimate conflict resolution.
Yes.
And so with that, there could be, we'll find out if it was financial, that she was hiding finances, or if it was another reason.
Infidelity.
Infidelity, potentially.
Travis, what would justice mean for Dan?
That's kind of a hard question to ask. Chef always wanted you to own up to your mistakes and take accountability for the actions that you took to get there. Yeah. And I think that's all Chef would want, is he would want someone to fess up to their mistake and just take, the accountable actions that this would be.
Travis, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your honesty and sharing some of these insights with us.
Of course.
Up next, a close forensic examination of Nancy's writing. Were there any hidden clues that could have saved Dan's life? It's a crime story that's actually stranger than fiction. What drove romance thriller novelist Nancy Brophy, author of the essay How to Murder Your Husband, to allegedly murder her own husband? Nancy's written several murder stories, and now a forensic analysis of the possible clues hiding in the pages of her books. Dr. Brian Russell is back, and we're going to start with Nancy's infamous essay, How to Murder Your Husband, in which she lays out possible motives for someone to carry out the act. And there's a passage in the essay that seems to lay out different ways that you could categorize murder techniques. So walk us through the three you picked out.
So let's take a look here. First, she talks about guns, and she talks about how they're loud, messy, require some skill. If it takes 10 shots for the sucker to die, either you have terrible aim or he's on drugs.
It's a little bit alarming, isn't it, audience? She might actually write this, even think it.
Then, next, she talks about knives. Really personal and close up, blood everywhere. Ooh.
It's intimate. And then finally, there's the garrote. Explain what that is to everybody.
There's the garrote. This is a strangulation device. This is from Phantom of the Opera, where they say, keep your hand at the level of your eyes so the phantom can't get the garrote around your neck. She says, how much upper body strength does it require to strangle a person? How much strength does it require, Doctor? Now, he hasn't done it, but as a medical doctor.
I've never thought about it even.
There's a lot of ligature there. There are a lot of ligaments there that you have. You got to be
stronger than the victim.
That's what she's talking about, I think, here. So she chose, if she's guilty, a gun.
So what is the significance of a gun used in a murder like this?
So based on this writing, we know that she's thought through the different kinds of ways you can kill somebody. And if she's guilty, she chose a gun, which suggests to me that she thought the pros outweighed the cons, and some of the pros of using the gun in this case might be it enabled her to stay at a distance from him. First, a physical distance, which means she's not going to get blood spatter on her. She did it in a place other than their home, so it didn't put evidence around the home. But it also might have enabled her to keep an emotional distance from him, because she talked about that. If you remember just a minute ago, she talked in the case of the knife about how it caused you to have to get right up close and personal. And she said, ooh, so referring to probably the physical
intimacy
aspect of it, the physical intimacy of it, and blood getting on you and things like that. But also there's an emotional intimacy involved. Usually we think of knife killings as rage killings, where gun killings are a little more calculated to maintain the distance, get the job done at a distance.
There's another passage I want you to read. This is from the same essay, and Dr. Russell found it especially incriminating. So if you don't mind, read this to us, and let's go through which words in here are bothering you.
So I would say I find it intriguing. What constitutes a good romantic suspense is the whys, she writes. What happened that forced the person into this situation? How will they justify this action? By the way, he needed killing is not a legal defense. This is still her writing. Can they keep a secret? A confidence whispered in the dark is no longer a secret. Now, when I look at this, those two words jump out at me because it suggests to me that she may be a person who thinks that murder is not just always a bad act that a bad person chooses to do. It may be that sometimes a good person is forced into a corner where murder is the only way out, and so they have a justification for doing it, which then causes me then to wonder again, what would her justification be? This does not, of course, prove that she's guilty by any means, but it suggests to me that there may be a capability there with her that I would think would be less likely to be there with somebody who thought the opposite, that murder is always a bad choice made by a bad person that has no justification.
There's one last paragraph, and Melissa Moore is here. If you don't mind, read the excerpt for us.
Sure. As a romantic suspense writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about murder and consequently about police procedure. After all, if the murder is supposed to set me free, I certainly don't want to spend any time in jail. And let me say clearly, for the record, I don't like jumpsuits and orange isn't my color.
You've spent your entire career looking at the minds of deranged individuals as the psyche of killers.
Right.
Who could write something like this?
Well, I believe she is a psychopath in the sense that exactly what Dr. Russell said is that this was just premeditated and that she had thought about it and she has an idea of who is capable of committing murder. Also from her writing, she said about her husband, actually, she said, gore, mayhem, murder comes naturally to me. My husband's learned to sleep with one eye open. So I think that there's multiple reasons that we'll see here with this trial. I think we're going to see that it's an ultimate conflict resolution. I think it's financial because she said divorces are expensive.
Yes.
And we do know she has a public defender, so I imagine there's not a lot of money there. So that, I think, is going to come out in the trial, whether she embezzled money, had a shopping addiction, maybe her husband didn't know about that. We're going to find that all out in the trial.
So is she a psychopath? Is she a sociopath? Is she even guilty? We're all going to find out. We'll keep a very close eye on what's going on in Oregon. We reached out to Nancy's attorney for a statement. We did not hear back in time for this taping. The case is far from over. What is the future going to look like for her? What's going to happen?
Well, we know she's charged with murder and unlawful use of a weapon. She's currently in jail without bail. So we'll see how this goes to court and if her defense attorney is able to keep out the fact that she was a romantic suspense writer.
Who wrote things that might be germane. Thank you very much, Melissa. Dr. Russell, as always, we'll be right back. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.